Welcome to the Moulding Private Practice Show, where we help healthcare practitioners in private practice keep true to their purpose and build a life of mastery by providing the knowledge, skills, and tools to bring their dreams to life. In this episode of the show, we speak to Adilia Silva, a clinical psychologist, about being a psychologist and everything private practice management related. Adilia Silva, welcome to the show. We're really glad to have you on board.
Thank you for having me.
So I know we haven't crossed paths too much, but she has actually found you, the co-host on the show, and got you, obviously convinced you to be on the show. How did you guys meet?
Well, LinkedIn. So yeah, he reached out to me via LinkedIn.
Okay, that's amazing. It actually shows you the power of it, though, hey? It shows you the power of the platform.
Yes, definitely.
Have you always been a LinkedIn user?
Well, just since I started my practice. So before that, I wasn't. I was an academic. So I did first year to PhD. I did a research master's in psychology first. So I was an academic. Set on the path. Here I go, and no, didn't want to do that for the rest of my life. So I went back and I did my clinical master's. And from that time, then I went onto LinkedIn.
Okay. I want to come back to that point there because I think that's interesting. I don't think we've ever covered that before, the clinical masters and, the research masters. But before I do that, I always ask this question is, when you're a little boy, well, for me, you're a little boy and people always ask you, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I remember when I was standard 2, we used to call it standard 2, which is grade 4. I always wanted to be a pilot. And it was because I used to watch Airwolf so much. I thought Stringfellow Hawk was the coolest ever. And so I wanted to be a pilot. Obviously I'm not. But when people asked you that, did you say clinical psychologist?
I said psychologist, but not clinical, because I didn't know the difference and all of those kind of things. So I did say psychologist. I did want to understand human behavior.
Okay.
Always a thing for me. So there was a help aspect, but more about understanding people. So that was my little girl dream: understand people.
Okay, and was that from a young age as well? I'm very curious about that because I would love to know why a psychologist so early in your consciousness, was something that you aspired to be.
Well, it was as a young girl, so a very young girl. I remember. So I also did standards. So I'm going to say, so from standard 1 or so, it was, and then things just showed differently to me. So science started becoming an important aspect of my life. So I started going into maybe I want to be in genetics and all of that kind of stuff as I went into high school. But that was always at the back of my mind. I want to understand people. I want to grasp the complexity of human nature and all of that. But yes, so I must say I kind of ebbed and flowed in terms of my dream, but it was always there. It was always the underlying aspect.
Okay, that's actually very interesting. I must confess, I didn't know what a psychologist does. In our community, we hardly, came across a psychologist. And I think I probably only heard it when I was in high school, as in, that's a profession, which is interesting. We heard of doctors and, accountants, and even accountants, I only heard about when we were in high school, but attorneys, or lawyers was a common one, teachers, obviously. But yeah, I'm so glad that you had that consciousness so early on as well, because I think what's amazing about the world that we live in now is there's definitely, and I don't know if you find the same, but there's definitely this level of higher consciousness at the moment. Kids are used to knowing what their feelings are, or they need to speak to someone. Our little boys struggle with sensory integration stuff, so you got very used to talking about talking to OTs and physios and stuff like that. And so yeah, it's part of his consciousness. You can't unlearn that. Whereas I think when I was growing up, we had less of that part. We knew what teachers were, remedial teachers sometimes, but not the rest of the really cool healthcare professionals.
I agree with you. Growing up, I didn't know, so I knew I wanted to know about the complexity of human nature, but I didn't know psychologist. I didn't know OT. Heck, I didn't even know physiotherapists. So it was that kind of thing. So yes, it was very narrowed. I'm glad that nowadays it's much broader and people know that they can seek help. They don't have to suffer alone and in silence and go to the family and get what, the old wives' tale kind of remedy and all of those kind of things. So I'm really glad it's been broadened. But then for those that aren't financially well, there is those services available. They just don't know. So there's community clinics, there's the hospitals. But people just aren't aware that there's all of these professionals. So they think of hospital doctors. No, there's speech therapists, there's OTs, there's physios, there's psychologists, there's everything, but they're not aware. And that's the issue, yes.
Yeah, I mean, 100% right. And I think that, that's the reason for doing these type of episodes, is to bring out that level of consciousness about there's more, there's more than one profession within, the healthcare sector. And I think for me growing up, it was always doctor, dentist. And like, I didn't know, like you said, that there's actually so many different other types of, of practitioners. And they all have their amazing stories. I mean, we've chatted to, speech therapists and audiologists and podiatrists and occupational therapists, obviously, physios, and they all love what they do. And I think, the amazing thing about, healthcare practitioners, like yourself, is that even within that sector, even within being a psychologist and even within being a clinical psychologist, you could specialize in something. And I think that's the amazing thing. It's like, that's the world that you can almost like dive into, is that you don't have to do one thing, which is, opening up that whole border and horizons, for children growing up is amazing. But the other thing I want to go into is the fact that being a psychologist is not easy. You alluded to that now, in terms of the number of degrees and stuff like that. What was an eye-opener for me was how many degrees you needed to actually just be to be called a psychologist. Can you take us through that?
Yes, so it's a bachelor's degree, which is 3 years. In my case, I've got a science degree. I came from that route, but you can come from different routes. I know people come from BAs, BComs, anything. So I almost say first year, you don't need to know that you want to be a psychologist. As long as you take psychology, that's all that you need. 3 years bachelor's. Then you got a selection process based on your academics into the honors program. And then to get into the master's, it's a selection process, which is your academics as well as you, the person. And it's not, you don't get in the first time. So if it's a clinical or counseling program, you don't get in the first time. It's very rare that you do. It's not at the one university. Usually you need to apply at numerous universities over numerous years. And it's at that point that a lot of people get demotivated. Because I've just studied for 4 years. What do I do?
Yeah, and as you said, it's I think you're the first one that mentioned it like that. It's the academics plus the you part. And someone said, like, how do you prepare for this? And there isn't like maybe we get a board member on at some point, but to take us through that. But you can't really, you're either there or you're not there. And I like how you said it. I did come across one other psychologist that said she got in like first time, but you said it's like pretty rare, that happens, which is good though. I mean, like, it almost like keeps the integrity of the program. And I think, what I wanted to highlight by this is that it's not a linear path. You can't just plot, okay, I'm going to dedicate 6 years and then, I'm going to be a psychologist. That part is almost like beyond your control. And the other thing that's sobering for me is that if you get past honors level or get to honors level, you don't have anything, from a psychologist perspective. Your job opportunities at that point is pretty limited. Is that true?
Yes and no, because you can, with that honors, do another 6 months where you can either become a registered counselor or a psychometrician. but that takes another extra 6 months. I mean, you can do that. You can open practice and do that kind of work. So, yeah. And for the job market, you've got an honors as well. So not necessarily in psychology, but you've got an honors degree.
I just found, like, with my wife, obviously she went through the Clin Psych route as well, is that it was the things that kind of came up was like HR and stuff like that. And yes, you could go down that route, but I'm glad you mentioned the other two routes. And in my experience, I mean, even the registered counselor route that came up quite recently. I mean, like, I don't remember that, maybe 10, 15 years ago as being an option, but definitely right now it's a very viable option. We have many clients that are registered counselors in private practice and that are doing really well, and they have their own space in the market, and all good. And while you're waiting for that master's registration, I think it's a very viable alternative.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned that. But take us through, I mean, when you got into your master's level, you mentioned there was two routes. How did that work?
So I thought naively that I was going to contribute to theory. So that's why I did the research master's. I thought I was going to contribute to theory. And then I did my PhD because, yes, I'm going to be innovative and I'm going to do all of this great work. No, that wasn't a reality. So, but I still knew that psychology was for me. So I went back and I applied for my clinical psychology master's. I went through the selection process. And at that point, I got in. So yes, it was essentially packing up what I was doing as a professional. So I was an academic, I was working at a university, packing up that whole professional career and then restarting. And gave me quite appreciation for what I actually do. So yes.
Is it fair to say then that the board process for psychology is almost like looking for mature people that would almost make a contribution in like a clinical setting? Is that how it works? So almost like if they find you too, and again, I haven't been through the process at all or anywhere close to it, but it seems to be like when I speak to people, it seems to be that it's like lots of people say when I was more mature, when I had more work experience, when I was like this, it seemed to be that I just got in. Is that how you see it as well?
Definitely. You need to be mature. You need to experience life. So yes, you can be young and get in, but you have to have had certain experiences. So it is about maturity level. It is about, for me, it's how much you can walk the other person's shoes with them. So it's the empathy. How much empathy have you actually got to be able to do this work? And if you haven't had a lot of life experience, there's not much empathy. So
yeah. And I think because it's such a demanding profession as well, in terms of it takes so much out of you that if you, I mean, if you're not, and I say this very with the utmost level of respect, but if you're not as balanced and stuff like that, like how do you take care of the other person without like really hurting yourself in the process? And I think that's what I take out of it, is that I find even I'm sure that's what you find in your own practice as well, is that it comes to a level where you need to take a break, or else it's just difficult to keep that to your clients. Do you find that as well?
Definitely. I need to be very aware of myself, so that I know I need to take the break. So under COVID restrictions, it was difficult. We couldn't just take breaks, all of those kind of things. But you quickly learned. If you don't, you run the risk of not being helped. So you're pouring out of an empty cup and there's nothing you're doing there. And you can't do this work as an automatic pilot. It just doesn't work. So yes.
No, I have a lot of respect. I mean, with my wife as well. I mean, she loves what she does, and but you can see just before we have to take a break, like how difficult it is, to get through the last few weeks, and being that level connected, to patients must be very, really difficult. Before we had children, we would go on holiday because then you're not limited to the school holidays, so we would go every 3 months, for at least a week. And that worked really well. And then I think, when children came along, and especially the first few years, it's a bit more difficult to, to do that. So we always tied them in the school holidays and stuff like that. But yeah, I think that's, I think coming back to the board thing and the maturity, I think for anyone listening to this, I think that's probably one of the things that they would look at is, the maturity level. Do you have that full cup or half cup, as you just mentioned, now, to be able to give to your patients? And I think, and for me, that makes sense, like, although they're saying that, I mean, I can see the logic and the intelligence, around that selection, process. So when you qualified in a clinical setting, did you, because as clinical psychologists, you do have to work through community service. Did you have to do that as well? And what happened during that process?
I had to do my internship, and then I did do my ComServe, so my community service. Both are government, so you get positioned by the government. You apply to the government and they position you. So my first was a psychiatric hospital. I'm not sure if I can mention names, but
No,
okay.
I'm sure it's fine.
Okay, so I worked at Staffontein Psychiatric Hospital for my internship, and there I got quite a lot of exposure. So I got the forensic unit, where we would observe people to see if they could stand trial, essentially. And then I worked with those that couldn't stand trial. They were taken back to Staffontein, and I did therapy with those. And then I went through the acute and chronic, male and female units. So essentially, it's people that are in crisis and those that have had long-standing disorders. So I worked at Staffontein during my internship, and then during my ComServe year, I worked at a general hospital, again, government. And I got to see a whole different side of things. A great experience, but also very eye-opening.
Yes. Eye-opening in what sense?
Just in terms of what is available. So there's what services are available in a hospital, and then what resources, should I rather say, aren't available in a hospital. And how you work around it and how you make the best of it.
Was it a tertiary hospital or a secondary?
It was a secondary.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with that. I think with Ingrid, she was in a tertiary hospital in northern KZN, and the same as you just said now, the need is so great that, and I think it's people, that, like we mentioned, psychologists, like growing up and not knowing what that is. I think the unfortunate case where we are, even, well, in this country, I think most people still don't understand. And it is governed by money and lack of awareness and certain communities and all of that stuff. But there's such a need. And I think when you're dealing with people like that came to hospital, she mentioned, some, like, obviously it's northern KZN, so lots of snake bites, lots of, amputees, all of those things. And there's a psychological aspect to it, that you can help people through. But you don't have, like a year's worth of therapy. You have to almost like bandage quickly mentally and then move on, which must be quite difficult because it almost goes against everything that you've been trained.
Yes, it is. It's very difficult because you need to do short-term therapy. You can't be long-term. You can't be developing this huge internal dialogue and awareness and all of that kind of thing. It's quick. These are the coping skills. Boom, 1, 2, 3, get out. We don't have time. There's a waiting list. There's all of this kind of thing. And then, unfortunately, at the hospital I worked at, there was a lot of attempted suicides. So over the weekend, the hospital would get filled with attempted suicides, and then Monday morning, there we were, trying to see. It's almost like triage, psychological triage. Who has to stay admitted? Who is fine to go home? Who needs just quick little therapy? All of this kind of thing, with limited resources. And that was difficult and a lot of stigma. So I don't want to see the psychologist. I'm not crazy. Keep coming up. And I kept thinking, but no, that's not the point. You just try to kill yourself. You're not crazy. It's this, it's life, it's all of this kind of thing. But that's still, even in private practice, I still have a lot, especially the older generation. But I'm not crazy. Why am I coming to see you? I'm not crazy.
Yeah, and you know, my hope is, and I'm sure we'll get there, because I see such positive, you know, cases or experiences, and you know, with especially with younger children, in terms of how, you know, how aware they are in terms of how these professionals help them. I mean, I mentioned my little boy, and I have a firm belief that, for instance, like OTs, you know, should be part of the school curriculum. You know, just like psychologists, you know, should be part of the curriculum on how you become an employed person. You know, because and it amazes me like how we manage to get so much done in a corporate setting. But you're dealing with, just say, you know, like 10 people in a team, and they each have their own lives, they each have their own challenges, and they each have their own struggles. And you want to rally them to like a common objective. That's probably the most difficult thing that they've ever experienced in life. And you just say, actually, we're just going to do this. And you know, the world doesn't work like that. I mean, like if you look at Roger Federer, you know, he's got a, you know, I follow like Liverpool, the football club, and you know, like even with them, you know, when they get a psychologist on just to help them with their thinking, their performance levels improve. But in corporate, we kind of like just assume people are actually okay. You know, like they just pitch up on a Monday morning and then they kind of clicked on, and they're going to do their best work. And you know, the more I think about it, the more I think how ludicrous that aspect is.
It's almost like you leave your life there at the door. When you come through here, you don't have a life anymore.
Yeah, and it's like it's the most interesting thing. I mean, like as we mention it, it sounds like ridiculous, but that is what happens, and I'm sure that's what you're finding with your patients as well. It's like, you know, that is probably what they say, you know. But I was expected to do this, but I was like, you know, I was going through a divorce, or I was going through this, and I was just expected, like, you know, actually the divorce was like 2 months ago, so now you should be okay. Like,
it's fine. It didn't happen. Yes. There's a lot, and especially under now with so a lot of companies during COVID, there was a lot of Section 189s. People lost their jobs, there were retrenchments, and those that stayed behind are now expected to do the work of 3 people. And the amount of they learning on the job that they need to do, also the amount of life is not happening to me anymore. So we are still in the same boat. We all, what is COVID? Oh, am I going to get infected? All of this kind of thing. And it's almost like, no, you can't think about that. You need to perform, and perform for 3 people. Really? Does that really work? And then those that were retrenched, it's how do I find another job? How do I go for an interview realizing that I don't know where my next meal is coming from, but I need to perform here? So it was all of these expectations, and not even with COVID. So outside of COVID, so pre-COVID, it was the same thing. People are expected to perform, but they don't. The different aspects of their lives aren't looked at. So I usually say to people, think of your life as a cake. You've got the fun aspect. How many people actually pay attention to fun? Very little. But they don't see that as a part of the cake. Then there's career, then there's spirituality. There's all of these slices that people just don't look at. And when they don't look at it, they're not performing well.
You're the first person that mentioned Section 189s, I think, that we've ever had. And it's almost a hunch that I've had in terms of, you know, how the last 2 years have affected us. And you know, from a personal point of view, I mean, like I just think about like the whole schooling thing. We had to homeschool, especially in the first 6 months or so, you know, or definitely in the first year for some time. And that was just crazy. You know, unfortunately, you know, we both, myself and you know, my wife, you know, we can control our time to some extent. But I can't imagine, you know, like what you just said, you know, because you know, exactly what you just said, even if you weren't retrenched, if you were one of the lucky ones that were still in the job, underlying, or the under, the underlying principle would have been that you actually have to work harder, because I want to keep my job, so it's almost like firing someone in front of you just to set an example, kind of thing. And I can't imagine those people trying to balance out like homeschooling with that, and then yeah, sorting out a family, sorting out all of those things, and stuff like that. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's something I always suspected. I just never heard anyone confirm it on that level, in terms of how difficult it was. I definitely noticed on my side, definitely the homeschooling was was a challenge, because I couldn't imagine how you, how you balance that. I mean, we barely made it through it, because we're not teachers. I mean, like, I mean, there was this whole expectation on teachers, like how they were, changing. So, yeah, but really difficult time. But I think it was just how difficult I think life in general is, with COVID and stuff like that, which you would have seen. So tell me, and like, so coming back to that is, I find with psychologists, I mean, it's incredible how much energy, those sessions take out of, like out of you, because you can't just, you mentioned the hospital setting and almost the triage. With us, with IT, and I did consulting with, management consulting. You could, although you couldn't switch it off, but it was, you're dealing with systems, and you're dealing with, you can, but being in someone's personal space and seeing that image in front of you, and when they're talking through those stories, that must be quite difficult to separate out those two. Have you found that quite, I mean, did you find that academia prepared you enough for that experience?
No, academia did not prepare me for enough. I think my training did help, but there are still some cases that go home with me. So there are still some patients that go home with me. It takes real effort on my side to switch off, to not have them be with me all the time. And the amount of work that I do outside of the session, people aren't aware of. So they think it's just the session. I'm actually thinking about them. They're constantly on my mind. I should do this, I should do that. Pops in. I mean, I'm watching TV, I'm supposed to be relaxing, and oh, I'm going to try that for that person. And it's that kind of thing. So it's almost like it becomes an integrative part of you doing this job. And that's why self-care is so important, taking that time, because then it's only then that you really do switch off. Because overnight, it's very rare that I completely switch off. On the weekend, I make a very good effort to switch off, to not have those people that I'm not carrying those people around with me. So yes, it's a challenge. The training did help. I am getting better at it as I go through, as I get older. I'm getting better at it, but there's still that one or two case that stays with you. And
Yeah.
that, yeah.
I mean, I don't think I asked many psychologists that, but I definitely noticed it, with my wife. And, she doesn't watch as much TV now, actually. But she, there was a time when almost like the only thing that she could do to zone out was, you watch these, you almost like binge watch some of the series. And it's almost like you force your mind, like to get out of that zone, and like reading and stuff like that. But on my side, I promise, I have a huge amount of respect for psychologists because of just that aspect, that you can't really just switch it off. I think it's like with that most careers, but with you, because you're so intertwined with the stories, and it's real people, it's not these mythical people that you thinking about or talking about. These are their stories, these are their struggles, these are all of their stuff. You can't just switch it off.
No. And you've got the pressure that you're there to support them.
And I'm glad you mentioned also that it's not about that 1 hour session or the 45 minutes or 50 minutes, however long that session is, that people don't realize. It's like there's that afterthought and constantly keeping them in mind. I think, I think if they've been in therapy for a longer term, they do realize that. I mean, that's the reason that they stay in therapy for that long, is because they do realize that you have their back, and you have a vested interest in having, seeing them better. So yeah, so I want to mention that. But I want to go into private practice now, because that's the other dark art. It's like, did you find it was a natural transition from state into private practice? At what point did you decide you want to go into private practice?
Well, I went from ComServe straight into private practice.
Okay.
At that point, it was either being an academic again, which is not going to happen, or there was no job for me. And I was like, well, private practice it is.
Cool.
Yeah, deep end, here I go. So it was very scary. I did not know anything. I didn't know that I'd actually be a business person on top of being a psychologist. And yeah, it was, you now need to know about accounting. You now need to know about all of these things and registering here and registering there. And there's so many facets that it's mind-boggling. So yeah, scary.
So I'm going to ask the same question I asked you about your, your clinical work. So did you think academia prepared you enough for going into private practice?
Just in terms of time management, having a lot of balls juggling at the same time. Yes, that helped me a lot. Okay. I also knew by then that I needed to already be networking. So academia did help me know that I need to network and how to juggle many balls at the same time.
Okay, that's good. Because I find that that's almost like that, that really difficult moment for most practitioners is what you mentioned, quite nicely, is the business aspects or the business owner part. And it's almost like, you're really good at being a therapist, or, you figure that part out. And there's this other part that you have no clue. It's like becoming an accountant or an attorney or something else. It's almost like MBA stuff, and now you're expected to just figure that out and just do it. And I found that's quite a transition, for most people. And yeah, so did you? And so the other trend I found with most of the episodes that we've done with practitioners is that there always seem to be like a mentor or someone that showed them the ropes. Did you have someone like that as well? No. Okay. That's actually pretty cool.
No, so yeah, as I said, I was thrown into the deep end. There was no mentor, there was no one. I was just, you do it.
Okay.
You learn from your mistakes and you go along.
Okay, so the moral of this particular story then would be that actually without the mentor, you can still do it. Because, but then how did you find the resources? How did you stumble through? So, and I'll paint the picture. So 8 years ago or so, when Ingrid was really struggling with her practice, and it was, simple things like, sending out invoices was a mission, because it's not something that she wanted to do. So it, would always be late. And then obviously in private practice, if you don't send out the invoice, you don't get paid. If you don't send the invoice to the medical aid, you don't get paid by the medical aid as well. And so we designed the software to do that, because we looked at, many of the software at that time, and they were dinosaurs, like they were like really complicated. So we just designed something, very simple just to do it. And we found that was actually, lots of people were struggling with the same kind of things. Just sending out like appointments, like putting it on a calendar and sending out the, the invite for that, submission to medical aids, obviously. And I think it's a lot better now, like with software and stuff like that. I think most people, find something that's cool. So across practitioners, there seems to be, the one is the admin and billing side. The other one is the getting of referrals, I think, to build up a practice. And then the third one that always came up for some reason was the whole CPD points thing. I think it was always top of mind with most practitioners. Did you find the same? And how did you get through that?
So I was lucky in my master's year. I had one lecture where the lecturer actually told us, you need to register for professional indemnity. You need to register with the HPCSA. So she actually walked us very basic into the basics that we needed to open up a practice. And then she spoke about medical aids. And the horror story that I heard, and the horror that I heard in her eyes, I went, I'm not working with medical aids. That's it. No. So when I opened practice, I went, I'm going cash. I'm going being in cash practice. I'm not working with medical aids. I'll charge below medical aid rates already so that I don't have that nightmare. So that admin for me was eliminated. Because of the horror that I saw in her face, I was like, no, I'm not doing that. So that was what made it easier for me in that respect, in terms of admin. In terms of referrals, it was hard going. I must say the first 3 years was really difficult. After that, I started getting savvy. So I went to all the doctors in my area. I started being more proactive on my website. So I started blogging. I started doing all of these things to get those referrals, to get to be known. I found now word of mouth works. But in the meantime, I learned about Google, and I became an IT specialist myself. Very little extent. But all of those kind of things that they didn't tell us enough about. And I think also with the development of new software and all of that, that came about. So to get the referrals. And then CPD has always been a thorn. It's always something that's expensive, especially for psychologists. We don't get anyone offering us this and that for free, like a lot of medical doctors do. We have to pay for everything. Every CPD point you need to pay for. And you need those per year, otherwise you can't stay registered. And sometimes you go for things that you're not really interested in just because now I've got the time, so now I can do it. Or the year's coming to an end, I need to do this. So it's also that kind of, over the years, I've learned to start doing it early. So start doing depending on what I'm interested in. Also, I'm quite fortunate. I'm registered with the people that provide me with professional indemnity, also provide me with ethics points. So they send me in a case book and I get my ethics points from them. So it's something less that I need to worry. And that's also something I've learned over the years is kill two birds with one stone, to make things easier for myself.
I think what you're saying as well, which is the point I take out, is that you should just have a plan with it. So what I want to do is highlight, especially for someone that hasn't been in private practice or you're pretty young into private practice, is just know that these are things that come up. I mean, it's I've met many practitioners over the last few years, and they all have that same story, around those 3 points that I mentioned, and it's just to have a plan. Have a plan, know it's going to come up. But, there's that fear factor with practitioners as well, is what happens if I get that HPCSA audit? Do I have everything in order? Do I have my certificates here? Like, do I have the ethics points? And I think as long as you have a plan and you have it somewhere, you start the year like you just said now, I think, that should be good enough. The other one that comes up, but, not everyone mentions that until many years into their private practice, or if we dig deeper, is the whole unpaid management. And it's like, it's a thing that people don't talk about, but it's, so we went from the software to providing like almost like a managed service, so, and we thought, okay, can we do, because lots of clients said, like the software is amazing, but, I want someone to answer our phones. So we thought, okay, cool, we could do something like that. And we were horrified, to see some of the clients when we took them on, how big their unpaid book was. We're talking about over 50,000 sometimes like even 100,000. And to be fair, sometimes it was as simple as, because they worked with medical aids, it wasn't like allocating all of the medical aid payments. So once they did that, that's the admin part, it did come down, but there was still a huge amount. Did you find the same? And was there a strategy that you used to get on top of that?
Well, every year I always have that unpaid amount. This year, and this is my plan for this year, is actually saying to people that you need to, so any new people that come into my practice, if they pay me via EFT, they actually need to pay me before the session. Because that's how I found that people don't pay me because they walk off, oh, I don't have to pay. and I'm not going to do EFT, I'm not going back, so I don't have to pay. And that was been a big thing, is that because there isn't that physical aspect, so I don't have credit card facilities. So it's EFT or cash. And if it's EFT, people just walk off of it. I don't have to pay. So that is something that I have almost 10 years down the line have learned now I need to put in a new thing into place and become stricter. So the psychologist is in me going, oh, I feel for this person. The business person is going, I can't run a loss anymore, kind of thing.
Yeah, F&B doesn't quite accept that excuse for your car payment.
No, exactly. So yes, and it's something I think is lifelong. So you speaking about your practice management software and all of that kind of thing, it still happens, it still works. So it's all of these things that you need to put in place, but still be aware at the end of the day, this still can happen.
Yeah, and again, you collaborated the story, and I think it's a point again that everyone just has to be aware of. Like have a plan for it. Like as you mentioned now, there's strategies that you can put in place. But if you don't know that this problem is going to happen, it does happen very quickly. And especially with psychologists, I mean, you see someone for 4 sessions, and if you're charging anywhere close to discovery, rates, that's 4,000 rands out. And it's like, very quickly that could rack up, do
Yes.
that 2 or 3 clients. I mean, like, it adds up very quickly. So I think that's the part that I find, the strategies that I've seen that work really well is, where it's defined, exactly what you're going to do, when you're going to do it. If you have like a holistic view of, like who's paid, who's not paid, all of those things. And I think, especially as you said, once they walk out of the practice, life happens, they either intentionally or not non-intentional, they don't pay. And what happens? Because you just have a telephone number, an email address, and a physical address sometimes. And
Yes.
who's going to follow up with that stuff? And I think that's the dilemma. And I think for anyone listening to it, in private practice, just have a plan, whatever that plan is. There's multiple of those things, but I do also want to ask, I mean, you mentioned you've been in private practice for many years now. Is there something that you wish, and this is a very selfish question, by asking it, but I'm trying to understand, how do we help practitioners more? And is there something that you would have wished was available, when you started private practice?
Software to keep my notes.
Okay, that's a good one. Anything else?
Yeah, almost all along those lines. How do I keep my files? Where do I keep my files? What do I do with them? So yes, I know we're only allowed to keep them for 7 years and so forth. I mean, there's exceptions with all of those kind of things, but generally just someone who would sit with me and talk about those things, the practicalities of the files, the admin in terms of the patient notes, all of those aspects. I thought, it's like when you a student, when you're doing your ComServe, all of that, you do your notes as you're talking to the person. In private practice, you can't do that. It's your time. It's your own time that you're doing all of that stuff. So I'm not even talking about just the billing and all of that. It's the actual other aspects of the work. And I wish someone would have sat with me and said, okay, you actually need a plan. You actually need to set out time and block out time for that, because otherwise you won't get to it.
Yeah, nicely said. I mean, I think that's a really good suggestion. And, the one that came up, I think it was, quite recently with the episodes, was someone mentioned that, healthcare practitioners, especially when you're starting in private practice, you don't have the funds to be able to invest in some of this stuff. So, it would be amazing if you could almost have that. And then as your practice improves, then you pay for it or something like that. And we always had like a trial account. But what it got me thinking was, maybe we should change it to be more revenue based or something, so, you have everything, because like, this is my IT hat, speaking as well. I know that you need to invest in the systems in order to, do the work. or get the best performance. So almost like give the systems, and then when the practice improves, then then I'm sure practitioners would pay the due rate or whatever that is. So I think, do you think something like that would work?
Definitely. I mean, for myself, it would be have the systems for me. Let me get used to the system. Once I've got revenue, then of course I'm going to be paying you. But at the beginning, don't expect payment from me because I don't have it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I like that. I mean, it's something we're going to run with. I think that's probably our strategy for this year, is to have something on those lines, or thinking on those lines, because I don't think it's about the trial account. It's about the actual setup of the practice, to the point. And so I've got a lot of respect for for the clients that actually did start up and went through that whole process. But I also realized by having these episodes is that actually maybe changing the mindset and saying, okay, how do we support more in those early stages? Almost like giving that in those early stages would be probably a better approach. So yeah, something we'll look at. I do want to wrap up now. Is there anything around being a psychologist or being in private practice that you thought I should have asked you that we didn't?
Just how lonely it can be.
That's a good one.
Yes.
And a strategy for that?
Have a personal life, a social life.
Okay.
Under COVID, we weren't going to any places, so we would go to conferences or all of that kind of thing. There wasn't that. A lot of webinars, and that was also soul destroying. So get together when you can with peers. Yeah. So it's the social aspect and also the peers. Get together with peers. Do some work like that. Where you just talk.
Yeah, and I know they have these, these business network groups. I was just part of some of them. But what you're saying is probably something bigger. It's like something, it's almost like a business network group, but for healthcare professionals. It's almost like just a wind down or catch up type, session.
Yes.
Okay, cool. I like that. Because yeah, you're right. We used to do, before COVID, we used to do lots of conferences, obviously, where we would go and advertise our software and stuff like that. And there was definitely a vibe, around practitioners, even if it was just like having lunch together, meeting someone you went to, you studied with or something. It was always something cool.
Yes.
Okay. That's it. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks for doing this. We really, really appreciate it. I enjoyed all of it. So yeah, thanks again.
Thanks again for the opportunity. Thank you.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. As always, stay tuned and we'll speak to you in the next episode.